This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
This chapter deals with the environmental influences on an organisation. And the first approach is what's known as PESTEL. So usually known as PEST, then EL was added on the end. And PESTEL, it's political, economic, social, technological, ecological or environmental, and legal. So these are large influences, kind of macro type influences, which tend to affect all organizations, although maybe in slightly different ways. So and organizations have to think how they're going to respond to that, really. So political, examples of a political influence that could affect organizations. It could be who wins an election. What happens if, say, speaking for the present time, if Donald Trump gets in for a second term or someone else gets in for a second term? What happens if there is tension and political unrest somewhere in an organization? If war breaks out, that is obviously in a particular country, that's going to affect organizations within that country. Economic will involve influences such as change of interest rates, change of exchange rates, tax rates, whether we are in boom or recession, what is the level of economic optimism. You don't need to worry too much about whether, say, interest rates are economic or political. In some countries it is the government that sets interest rates. In other countries it is the national bank that sets interest rates. In a way, it doesn't really matter under which category, political or economic or indeed legal, interest rates come. The important thing is that the organization has recognized that a change in interest rates will almost certainly affect its trading. Social. The big social changes at the moment tend to be to do with population. So many countries, because of better medical care and breakthroughs and so on, there is a larger and larger proportion of older people and a smaller and smaller proportion of younger people. And this will affect organizations, so that if you are in the drug industry, the pharmaceutical industry, then older people tend to be the members of the population who require more medical care, more pharmaceuticals. So the aging of the population is going to be good for such an organization. If, however, the organization was a school and birth rates have fallen, then they will find it harder and harder, perhaps, to fill their classrooms. Also within social comes habit, comes fashion. So in some countries there is an increasing move towards veganism or vegetarianism, and if you are a farmer producing beef or even milk, then this may affect you. Technological, the biggest single technological breakthrough or change is the effect of the internet. Think how many types of organization have been very fundamentally affected by the internet. So banks and banking. It used to be books and music. Amazon came in and began selling books over the internet. Now, of course, Amazon sells almost everything over the internet. And this is putting traditional shops on the street under quite a bit of pressure. Other technological changes can come through. Maybe the improvement of batteries will change what motor manufacturers have to do by way of production of new cars and the sort of engines and power which they're going to be using in those. Ecological or environmental, increasingly green issues, carbon footprints, release of greenhouse gases, waste, rubbish production, recycling and so on. These are all becoming issues which are important to consumers and may be important to governments, and we have to know maybe how we're going to respond to this. And finally, legal, legal used to be just part of political. Now it's been changed out or split out. For example, there are more and more rules and regulations governing health and safety at work, consumer protection. When it comes to looking at money flows, there's more and more regulations about understanding how someone has got money, so that we can maybe discover who is money laundering, who has obtained that money through illegal measures. So these are all the very large effects which affect almost every company. They will of course affect different companies in slightly different ways, but it's quite difficult to completely avoid many of these. Next, we can zoom in a little bit, and we have got here something which is called Porter's 5 forces, or competitive forces. What we had in pastel back here was the large macro environmental effects. What we have in here are the competitive forces, which are going to be affecting, in particular, an industry sector. So we're zooming in from everything. We're going to say, well, let's look at the car industry. Let's look at the airline industry. Let's look at the publishing industry. Let's look at the pharmaceutical industry. And Porter's 5 forces does this. The 5 forces are as follows. First of all, you have got competition or rivalry. How competitive is the industry going to be in? Because this looks at industry sectors. So how competitive is the airline industry? How competitive is the newspaper industry and so on? So if you are in an industry with very many competitors all fighting for the market share, then you're not going to have as easy a time. It's going to be harder to make a profit. If you're in an industry where you are almost a monopoly, then of course you're going to have an easier life. It's going to be easier to make profits. So competition or rivalry. Then there's the threat of new entrants. New entrants, people who see that you're profitable, who may enter your business because they want a slice of the action. If you're in a business which requires a high amount of capital to get started, in other words, you have to build an enormous factory, then that'd be known as a bit of a barrier to entry. If you're in a business which is very complex, a lot of know-how involved, or you have to fulfill a lot of regulations, and again, there's certain barriers to entry. It's not impossible for other people to get in, but it's harder. If you're in an industry which is much more ordinary, then the barriers to entry are low, doesn't require much know-how, much capital investment. There'll be lots and lots of people coming in and trying their hand at it. And these new entrants are a nuisance because usually when you enter an industry, you want to do so with a big kind of launch, special promotions and so on. And of course, people in the industry already have to respond to that. Then you have your customers. So customers, if you have one large customer who takes about 80% of your output, then this customer can exercise enormous pressure on you because you cannot afford to lose 80% of your sales. This customer says, we want you to drop your prices by 20%, you kind of have to comply. If, however, you are selling to maybe 100 customers, roughly 1% of your output to each of the 100 customers, then unless they in some way get together, any one customer is not going to be very powerful. You can easily sustain the loss of 1% of your sales. Similarly with suppliers. If you are dependent on one supplier for a unique piece of raw material or a unique component, then you have to buy that from that supplier, and that supplier can do almost anything they like with the price, and you have to take it. If, however, the suppliers is 10 of them, they are supplying very ordinary stuff that it's easy to switch suppliers, it's easy to play one off against the other to get a good price, then the power of those suppliers is going to be much less. You're going to have a much more comfortable time. And finally, the fifth force is substitutes. So a substitute is really what gives the customer the same sort of result, but an entirely different mechanism is used to do that. For example, mobile phones are really a substitute to older-fashioned traditional fixed-line phones. Both achieve the same end, that you can speak to people, but they're doing it by quite different means. Similarly, something like Skype, which allows you to communicate really for free over the internet, is a substitute for both mobile phones and fixed-line phones. Substitutes often come through just technological advance. Substitute can often take you by surprise. Suddenly there's another way in which you can achieve something. There's not much you can do about substitutes. You can't kind of hold them back if they're any good. But all you can do is to learn to live with them and perhaps use some of their technology yourself. So this allows us to understand the competitive forces, allows us to understand to some extent our competitive advantage, which is really saying how easy a time are we going to have in this industry. Will we be always fighting to make a decent profit, or is the structure of the five forces such that we'll be able to make a profit, a reasonable profit, without too much trouble? Now that was environmental, that was outside the organisation. This chapter also deals a little bit with internal matters. And again we have Michael Porter again, who talked about the value chain. Now what we have to think about here is we have kind of written on this diagram all the kind of activities carried on by an organisation. So Porter says there's inbound logistics, getting the raw materials in. There's operations, which might be manufacturing. There's outbound logistics, perhaps putting stuff in stores and then sending it to the customer. Marketing and sales. Service, like training people, maintaining the goods after they've been sold. Anything that comes after the main sale is service. And these ones along the bottom here are known as the primary activities. Then up here, he had support activities. So we have procurement, how are we going to order goods, so how are we going to be able to find plant and machinery or premises and so on. This is really to do with placing orders, and Porter separated that out from inbound logistics. Inbound logistics is pretty much the physical receipt of goods. Human resources management. See, it affects all of the primary activities. We need to recruit people who will be in the warehouse and inbound logistics, who will be doing the manufacturing, who will be dealing with the warehouse for sales and packaging and so on there. Technological development is basically research and development. Again, this can affect all of the primary activities here. Better way of making goods, better way of perhaps reporting products as they need a service. Maybe we monitor and it reports back and it says, this component is about to fail. That's an effect of technology development on service. Think of firm infrastructure as the kind of head office, if you like. How are we organising the head office, the accounting department, and so on, all of the kind of admin stuff? Is it going to be divisionalised? Is it going to be very centralised and so on? We need to think about what sort of IT are we going to have to link up the various departments within the organisation. Now, what's all this about? Because Porter said that these activities, they have a cost. So let's say the total cost is 10 million. So the cost of your operations, etc., etc., all of these activities is 10 million. And then, let's say your revenue is 5 million. Big one, 15 million. Now that allows you then to make the margin or the profit here of 5 million. And Porter said, this is a bit of magic here. You're doing something which costs 10 million. Why are people coming and spending 15 million buying this from you? Why have they got the extra 5 in there? Why are they paying that? Why don't they do it themselves? And he said, this 5 million, this is the added value that you are bringing. Maybe people don't do it themselves because they can't. Maybe they don't do it themselves because they don't know how. Maybe they think it's too dangerous. But he was saying that you, as a producer here, must understand the reason that people come and give you enough money to enable you to make a profit. So one of the reasons they might be willing to pay you lots of money is that you promise fantastic quality. That's your secret. And if you promise fantastic quality, you must look after that part of your operations, maybe look after that part of the service, look after that part of the technology development which develops these very good products, look after the human resource management because the training of your workforce feeds into producing products of fantastic quality. If, however, people come to you because you can offer a product at a very low price, then that's what you must look at. You must say, how can I automate operations to get my prices really low? How can I organize my workforce to keep the wages really low and so on? But it says you need to examine yourself really to understand the key to your success, the key to you adding value. Finally, on this chapter, we look at SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis looks at external events, that's the opportunities and threats. That's the sort of stuff you'd identify in the political threats, perhaps. Maybe there are economic opportunities, there are maybe technological threats and opportunities and so on. These are external influences. It could be what your rivals are doing. It could be what your customers are demanding from you and so on. These are external. And then you have strengths and weaknesses. These are internal. For example, your skills. Your know-how. It could be that your factory is equipped with really modern machinery. These would all be strengths. A weakness might be that you are very bad at quality control. These are internal. So what SWOT analysis does is to say, really, we want these to be kind of matched up sensibly. SWOT analysis, it really lets you set out all the good things, all the bad things, both internal and external, that might be happening. So it can be arranged like this. If there's an opportunity and it matches with a strength, go for it. So the opportunity might be that one of your rivals is in financial trouble. The strength might be you've got lots of cash in the bank, so you'll be able to buy them at a cheap price because they're desperate. That's just a no-brainer to do that. If there's an opportunity to buy a rival and you didn't have any money in the bank, then there'd be a bit of a weakness there. Then what you have to do is first repair that weakness, or maybe find a way around it. So maybe instead of giving them cash, you offer them shares. So what we need is strategies which address the weakness or avoid reliance upon it. If there's a threat, let's say a new supplier is coming in from abroad, lots of money and so on there, how can we fight this threat of a new supplier coming into our country, potentially stealing the market share. Well, maybe what we use as a strength is the strength of our brand. You say, no, buy from us. We make the goods here, we're from this country, we've been trading for many years, you know what you're getting from us. Don't go off and gamble on this unknown supplier who's now coming in. Out here, if there's a threat and a weakness, it's very difficult. So in the UK, we're talking like 30 years ago, 40 years ago now, our car industry was extremely weak. The quality control was very bad. They weren't bringing in new models and so on. The cars produced in the UK car industry were by and large dreadful. And the threat was from very high quality, reliable, modern, in particular Japanese cars. And the UK car industry, given this huge weakness they had in terms of quality and modern designs, simply couldn't, stand up against these much better products coming in from abroad. And to all intents and purposes, the home-based UK car industry with UK brands has disappeared, except for a few, very specialist marks like Aston Martin and maybe Rolls-Royce and so on. Mass market family cars, although made in Britain, they're made by foreign companies. They're not British companies. British companies couldn't survive it.